takes place this month and being named Congressional Champion of Health Innovation by the Healthcare Leadership Council. Then Democratic Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton of the District of Columbia on infrastructure and issues involving the D.C. Metro, including a recent shutdown of the system. She'll also discuss the Flint, Michigan water crisis and oversight. Be sure to watch C-SPAN's Washington Journal beginning live at 7 a.m. Eastern Wednesday morning. Join the discussion.
Coming up tonight on C-SPAN, remarks from President Obama in Havana, Cuba. Then we hear from Republican lawmakers on the Brussels attack and the president's trip. After that, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses the AIPAC conference. And later, today's hearing on the 2017 Defense Department budget. Today, Arizona voters vote in that state's presidential primary. Utah holds caucuses for both parties, and Idaho has caucuses for Democrats. Later tonight, we'll bring you speeches by some of the candidates. Hillary Clinton campaigns in Seattle, while Senator Bernie Sanders is in San Diego, California. We'll have election results and speeches tonight here on C-SPAN.
During campaign 2016, C-SPAN takes you on the road to the White House as we follow the candidates on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Radio, and cspan.org.
During remarks today in Havana, Cuba, President Obama spoke about the terror attacks in Brussels. An article from the Washington Post is titled, "How the Brussels Attacks Could Force Obama to Betray His Policy Instincts." Greg Jaffe writes, instead of big military offensives, the president has opted for lower-profile measures, such as helping America's allies improve intelligence collection and sharing, as the United States did after the 9/11 attacks. The article goes on to say, privately, Obama has worried that a large-scale terror attack in Europe or on American soil could force him to plunge American forces into another large and costly war in the Middle East, something he has vowed to avoid. That's from the Washington Post. Now we'll show you the president's speech from Havana. This is 35 minutes.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. Please. Thank you very much. To President Castro, the people of Cuba, thank you so much for the warm welcome that I have received, that my family have received, and that our delegation has received. It is an extraordinary honor to be here today. Before I begin, please indulge me. I want to comment on the terrorist attacks that have taken place in Brussels. The thoughts and the prayers of the American people are with the people of Belgium, and we stand in solidarity with them in condemning these outrageous attacks against innocent people. We will do whatever is necessary to support our friend and ally Belgium in bringing to justice those who are responsible. And this is yet another reminder that the world must unite. We must be together, regardless of nationality or race or faith, in fighting against the scourge of terrorism. We can and we will defeat those who threaten the safety and security of people all around the world. To the government and the people of Cuba, I want to thank you for the kindness that you've shown to me and Michelle, Malia, Sasha, my mother-in-law, Marion. Cultivo una rosa blanca. In his most famous poem, José Martí made this offering of friendship and peace to both his friend and his enemy. Today, as the President of the United States of America, I offer the Cuban people el saludo de paz. Havana is only 90 miles from Florida, but to get here we had to travel a great distance, over barriers of history and ideology, barriers of pain and separation. The blue waters beneath Air Force One once carried American battleships to this island to liberate, but also to exert control over Cuba. Those waters also carried generations of Cuban revolutionaries to the United States, where they built support for their cause. And that short distance has been crossed by hundreds of thousands of Cuban exiles on planes and makeshift rafts, who came to America in pursuit of freedom and opportunity, sometimes leaving behind everything they owned and every person that they loved. Like so many people in both of our countries, my lifetime has spanned a time of isolation between us. The Cuban Revolution took place the same year that my father came to the United States from Kenya. The Bay of Pigs took place the year that I was born. The next year, the entire world held its breath, watching our two countries as humanity came as close as we ever have to the horror of nuclear war. As the decades rolled by, our government settled into a seemingly endless confrontation, fighting battles through proxies. In a world that remade itself time and again, one constant was the conflict between the United States and Cuba. I have come here to bury the last remnant of the Cold War in the Americas. I have come here to extend the hand of friendship to the Cuban people. I want to be clear. The differences between our governments over these many years are real, and they are important. I'm sure President Castro would say the same thing. I know because I've heard him address those differences at length. But before I discuss those issues, we also need to recognize how much we share. Because in many ways, the United States and Cuba are like two brothers who've been estranged for many years, even as we share the same blood. We both live in a new world, colonized by Europeans. Cuba, like the United States, was built in part by slaves brought here from Africa. Like the United States, the Cuban people can trace their heritage to both slaves and slave owners. We've welcomed both immigrants who came a great distance to start new lives in the Americas. Over the years, our cultures have blended together. Dr. Carlos Finlay's work in Cuba paved the way for generations of doctors, including Walter Reed, who drew on Dr. Finlay's work to help combat yellow fever. Just as Martí wrote some of his most famous words in New York, Ernest Hemingway made a home in Cuba and found inspiration in the waters of these shores. We share a national pastime, la pelota. And later today, our players will compete on the same Havana field that Jackie Robinson played on before he made his major league debut. And it's said that our greatest boxer, Muhammad Ali, once paid tribute to a Cuban that he could never fight, saying that he would only be able to reach a draw with the great Cuban, Teófilo Stevenson. So even as our governments became adversaries, our people continued to share these common passions, particularly as so many Cubans came to America. In Miami or Havana, you can find places to dance the cha-cha-cha or the salsa, and eat ropa vieja. People in both of our countries have sung along with Celia Cruz or Gloria Estefan, and now listen to reggaeton or Pitbull. Millions of our people share a common religion, a faith that I paid tribute to at the shrine of Our Lady of Charity in Miami, a peace that Cubans find in La Cachita. For all of our differences, the Cuban and American people share common values in their own lives. A sense of patriotism and a sense of pride, a lot of pride. A profound love of family, a passion for our children, a commitment to their education. And that's why I believe our grandchildren will look back on this period of isolation as an aberration, as just one chapter in a longer story of family and of friendship. But we cannot and should not ignore the very real differences that we have about how we organize our governments, our economies, and our societies. Cuba has a one-party system. The United States is a multi-party democracy. Cuba has a socialist economic model. The United States is an open market. Cuba has emphasized the role and rights of the state. The United States is founded upon the rights of the individual. Despite these differences, on December 17th, 2014, President Castro and I announced that the United States and Cuba would begin a process to normalize relations between our countries. Since then, we've established diplomatic relations and opened embassies. We've begun initiatives to cooperate on health and agriculture, education, and law enforcement. We've reached agreements to restore direct flights and mail service. We've expanded commercial ties and increased the capacity of Americans to travel and do business in Cuba. And these changes have been welcomed, even though there are still opponents to these policies. Still, many people on both sides of this debate have asked, why now? Why now? There is one simple answer. What the United States was doing was not working. We have to have the courage to acknowledge that truth. A policy of isolation designed for the Cold War made little sense in the 21st century. The embargo was only hurting the Cuban people instead of helping them. And I've always believed in what Martin Luther King Jr. called the fierce urgency of now. We should not fear change, we should embrace it. That leads me to a bigger and more important reason for these changes. Creo en el pueblo cubano. I believe in the Cuban people. This is not just a policy of normalizing relations with the Cuban government. The United States of America is normalizing relations with the Cuban people. And today I want to share with you my vision of what our future can be. I want the Cuban people, especially the young people, to understand why I believe that you should look to the future with hope. Not the false promise which insists that things are better than they really are, or the blind optimism that says all your problems can go away tomorrow. Hope that is rooted in the future that you can choose, and that you can shape, and that you can build for your country. I'm hopeful because I believe that the Cuban people are as innovative as any people in the world. In a global economy powered by ideas and information, a country's greatest asset is its people. In the United States, we have a clear monument to what the Cuban people can build. It's called Miami. Here in Havana, we see that same talent in cuentapropistas, cooperatives, and old cars that still run. El cubano inventa del aire. Cuba has an extraordinary resource, a system of education which values every boy and every girl. And in recent years, the Cuban government has begun to open up to the world and to open up more space for that talent to thrive. In just a few years, we've seen how cuentapropistas can succeed while sustaining a distinctly Cuban spirit. Being self-employed is not about becoming more like America, it's about being yourself. Look at Sandra Lidice Aldama, who chose to start a small business. Cubans, she said, can innovate and adapt without losing our identity. Our secret is not in copying or imitating, but simply being ourselves. Look at Papito Valladares, a barber whose success allowed him to improve conditions in his neighborhood. I realize I'm not going to solve all the world's problems, he said, but if I can solve problems in the little piece of the world where I live, it can ripple across Havana. That's where hope begins, with the ability to earn your own living and to build something you can be proud of. That's why our policies focus on supporting Cubans instead of hurting them. That's why we got rid of limits on remittances, so ordinary Cubans have more resources. That's why we're encouraging travel, which will build bridges between our people and bring more revenue to those Cuban small businesses. That's why we've opened up space for commerce and exchanges so that Americans and Cubans can work together to find cures for diseases and create jobs and open the door to more opportunity for the Cuban people. As President of the United States, I've called on our Congress to lift the embargo. It is an outdated burden on the Cuban people. It's a burden on the Americans who want to work and do business or invest here in Cuba. It's time to lift the embargo. But even if we lifted the embargo tomorrow, Cubans would not realize their potential without continued change here in Cuba. It should be easier to open a business here in Cuba. A worker should be able to get a job directly with companies who invest here in Cuba. Two currencies shouldn't separate the type of salaries that Cubans can earn. The internet should be available across the island so that Cubans can connect to the wider world and to one of the greatest engines of growth in human history. There's no limitation from the United States on the ability of Cuba to take these steps. It's up to you. And I can tell you as a friend that sustainable prosperity in the 21st century depends on education, healthcare, and environmental protection, but it also depends on the free and open exchange of ideas. If you can't access information online, if you cannot be exposed to different points of view, you will not reach your full potential. And over time, the youth will lose hope. I know these issues are sensitive, especially coming from an American president. Before 1959, some Americans saw Cuba as something to exploit, ignored poverty, enabled corruption. And since 1959, we've been shadow boxers in this battle of geopolitics and personalities. I know the history, but I refuse to be trapped by it. I've made it clear that the United States has neither the capacity nor the intention to impose change on Cuba. What changes come will depend upon the Cuban people. We will not impose our political or economic system on you. We recognize that every country, every people must chart its own course and shape its own model. But having removed the shadow of history from our relationship, I must speak honestly about the things that I believe, the things that we as Americans believe. As Martí said, liberty is the right of every man to be honest, to think and to speak without hypocrisy. So let me tell you what I believe. I can't force you to agree, but you should know what I think. I believe that every person should be equal under the law. Every child deserves the dignity that comes with education and health care and food on the table and a roof over their heads. I believe citizens should be free to speak their mind without fear, to organize and to criticize their government and to protest peacefully, and that the rule of law should not include arbitrary detentions of people who exercise those rights. I believe that every person should have the freedom to practice their faith peacefully and publicly. And yes, I believe voters should be able to choose their governments in free and democratic elections. Not everybody agrees with me on this. Not everybody agrees with the American people on this, but I believe those human rights are universal. I believe they are the rights of the American people, the Cuban people, and people around the world. Now, there's no secret that our governments disagree on many of these issues. I've had frank conversations with President Castro. For many years, he has pointed out the flaws in the American system: economic inequality, the death penalty, racial discrimination, wars abroad. That's just a sample. He has a much longer list. But here's what the Cuban people need to understand. I welcome this open debate and dialogue. It's good. It's healthy. I'm not afraid of it. We do have too much money in American politics. But in America, it's still possible for somebody like me, a child who was raised by a single mom, a child of mixed race who did not have a lot of money, to pursue and achieve the highest office in the land. That's what's possible in America. We do have challenges with racial bias in our communities, in our criminal justice system, in our society, the legacy of slavery and segregation. But the fact that we have open debates within America's own democracy is what allows us to get better. In 1959, the year that my father moved to America, it was illegal for him to marry my mother, who was white, in many American states. When I first started school, we were still struggling to desegregate schools across the American South. But people organized. They protested. They debated these issues. They challenged government officials. And because of those protests, and because of those debates, and because of popular mobilization, I'm able to stand here today as an African American and as President of the United States. That was because of the freedoms that were afforded in the United States, that we were able to bring about change. I'm not saying this is easy. There's still enormous problems in our society. But democracy is the way that we solve them. That's how we got health care for more of our people. That's how we made enormous gains in women's rights and gay rights. It's how we address the inequality that concentrates so much wealth at the top of our society. Because workers can organize and ordinary people have a voice. American democracy has given our people the opportunity to pursue their dreams and enjoy a high standard of living. Now, there are still some tough fights. It isn't always pretty, the process of democracy. It's often frustrating. You can see that in the election going on back home. But just stop and consider this fact about the American campaign that's taking place right now. You had 2 Cuban Americans in the Republican Party running against the legacy of a black man who was president, while arguing that they're the best person to beat the Democratic nominee, who will either be a woman or a Democratic socialist. Who would have believed that back in 1959? That's a measure of our progress as a democracy. So, here's my message to the Cuban government and the Cuban people. The ideals that are the starting point for every revolution, America's revolution, Cuba's revolution, the liberation movements around the world, those ideals find their truest expression, I believe, in democracy. Not because American democracy is perfect, but precisely because we're not. And we, like every country, need the space that democracy gives us to change. It gives individuals the capacity to be catalysts, to think in new ways, and to reimagine how our society should be, and to make them better. And there's already an evolution taking place inside of Cuba, a generational change. Many suggested that I come here and ask the people of Cuba to tear something down. But I'm appealing to the young people of Cuba who will lift something up, build something new. El futuro de Cuba tiene que estar en las manos del pueblo cubano. And to President Castro, who I appreciate being here today, I want you to know, I believe my visit here demonstrates you do not need to fear a threat from the United States. And given your commitment to Cuba's sovereignty and self-determination, I am also confident that you need not fear the different voices of the Cuban people and their capacity to speak and assemble and vote for their leaders. In fact, I'm hopeful for the future because I trust that the Cuban people will make the right decisions. And as you do, I'm also confident that Cuba can continue to play an important role in the hemisphere and around the globe. And my hope is that you can do so as a partner with the United States. We've played very different roles in the world, but no one should deny the service that thousands of Cuban doctors have delivered for the poor and suffering. Last year, American healthcare workers and the U.S. military worked side by side with Cubans to save lives and stamp out Ebola in West Africa. I believe that we should continue that kind of cooperation in other countries. We've been on the different side of so many conflicts in the Americas, but today, Americans and Cubans are sitting together at the negotiating table, and we are helping the Colombian people resolve a civil war that's dragged on for decades. That kind of cooperation is good for everybody. It gives everyone in this hemisphere hope. We took different journeys to our support for the people of South Africa in ending apartheid. But President Castro and I could both be there in Johannesburg to pay tribute to the legacy of the great Nelson Mandela. And in examining his life and his words, I'm sure we both realize we have more work to do to promote equality in our own countries, to reduce discrimination based on race in our own countries. And in Cuba, we want our engagement to help lift up the Cubans who are of African descent, who've proven that there's nothing they cannot achieve when given the chance. We've been a part of different blocs of nations in the hemisphere, and we will continue to have profound differences about how to promote peace, security, opportunity, and human rights. But as we normalize our relations, I believe it can help foster a greater sense of unity in the Americas. Todos somos americanos. From the beginning of my time in office, I have urged the people of the Americas to leave behind the ideological battles of the past. We are in a new era. I know that many of the issues that I've talked about lack the drama of the past, and I know that part of Cuba's identity is its pride in being a small island nation that could stand up for its rights and shake the world. But I also know that Cuba will always stand out because of the talent, hard work, and pride of the Cuban people. That's your strength. Cuba doesn't have to be defined by being against the United States any more than the United States should be defined by being against Cuba. And I'm hopeful for the future because of the reconciliation that's taking place among the Cuban people. You know, I know that for some Cubans on the island, there may be a sense that those who left somehow supported the old order in Cuba. I'm sure there's a narrative that lingers here which suggests that Cuban exiles ignored the problems of pre-revolutionary Cuba and rejected the struggle to build a new future. But I can tell you today that so many Cuban exiles carry a memory of painful and sometimes violent separation. They love Cuba. A part of them still considers this their true home. That's why their passion is so strong. That's why their heartache is so great. And for the Cuban American community that I've come to know and respect, this is not just about politics. This is about family. The memory of a home that was lost. The desire to rebuild a broken bond. The hope for a better future. The hope for return and reconciliation. For all of the politics, people are people and Cubans are Cubans. And I've come here, I've traveled this distance on a bridge that was built by Cubans on both sides of the Florida Straits. I first got to know the talent and passion of the Cuban people in America. And I know how they have suffered more than the pain of exile. They also know what it's like to be an outsider and to struggle and to work harder to make sure their children can reach higher in America. So the reconciliation of the Cuban people, the children and grandchildren of revolution, and the children and grandchildren of exile, that is fundamental to Cuba's future. You see it in Gloria Gonzalez, who traveled here in 2013 for the first time after 61 years of separation, and was met by her sister, Yorka. You recognized me, but I didn't recognize you, Gloria said after she embraced her sibling. Imagine that after 61 years. You see it in Melinda Lopez, who came to her family's old home. And as she was walking the streets, an elderly woman recognized her as her mother's daughter and began to cry. She took her into her home and showed her a pile of photos that included Melinda's baby picture, which her mother had sent 50 years ago. Melinda later said, "So many of us are now getting so much back." You see it in Christian Miguel Soler, a young man who became the first of his family to travel here after 50 years. And meeting relatives for the first time, he said, "I realized that family is family no matter the distance between us." Sometimes the most important changes start in small places. The tides of history can leave people in conflict and exile and poverty. It takes time for those circumstances to change, but the recognition of a common humanity, the reconciliation of people bound by blood and a belief in one another, that's where progress begins. Understanding and listening and forgiveness. And if the Cuban people face the future together, it will be more likely that the young people of today will be able to live with dignity and achieve their dreams right here in Cuba. The history of the United States and Cuba encompass revolution and conflict, struggle and sacrifice, retribution, and now reconciliation. It is time now for us to leave the past behind. It is time for us to look forward to the future together. Un futuro de esperanza. And it won't be easy, and there will be setbacks. It will take time. But my time here in Cuba renews my hope and my confidence in what the Cuban people will do. We can make this journey as friends and as neighbors and as family, together. Sí se puede. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Joseito, yo quisiera, aunque no es de tu región, escucharte una opinión sobre mi tierra lajera. Sé por tu guantanamera que eres un fruto oriental y espero que no halles mal que yo como villareño te pida con todo empeño tu opinión muy personal. Veniendo de equivocado, tú aquí en La Habana he nacido, siempre en la misma he vivido, fuera de
House Speaker Paul Ryan offered his condolences to the Belgian people after the terrorist attacks in Brussels. His remarks came during a briefing with Republican leaders discussing the agenda in the House, including the budget. This is 10 minutes.
All right, okay. Hey, they got the switch back.
What is that?
I don't know, I just turned it on. We'll see what happens. Anything different there? Yeah, no, okay. Sorry, there's this weird switch up here. First off, I want to express the condolences of the U.S. House of Representatives to the Belgian people. I know we're all watching this right now, and this scene is just so horrific. 1 minute, people are going about their day. The next minute, people are running for their lives. This is a terrorist attack in the heart of Europe. As our countries have always done, we must confront this threat together. We must defend democracy and defeat terror. Our prayers are with Brussels, as is our solidarity. Thank you.
I want to associate myself with the Speaker's comments. One thing we have learned, that these terrorist groups, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, know no boundaries, know no borders, and our way to stop them is to defeat them. Now, after the Paris attacks, the Speaker asked that we put a task force together. And many of you know we talked about it as the Chairman's Task Force on Counterterrorism and Homeland Security. We have passed a number of bills, some have becoming law, visa waiver program and others, but I want to highlight just two. One that was passed last night with Lee Zeldin. Lee Zeldin's bill, the Counterterrorism Screening and Assistance Act, passed 371 to 2. The legislation requires the Department of State and Homeland Security to produce an annual scorecard assessing the border security efforts of countries around the world. It would give us a scorecard to know those places that need greater security. Another bill that will be coming up tomorrow is it's authored by Mr. Katko. It's the Safe Gates Act, which will require a comprehensive security assessment of overseas airport security and seeks to enhance security cooperation between DHS and foreign partners. There will be continual bills you'll find on this floor from the task force to move forward, not only to make America more secure, but the world as well.
My heart breaks with the news coming out of Brussels this morning. It's yet another unspeakable act against innocent civilians. Certainly our world grows more complex. The enemies that we face are becoming more radical than ever. The groups that seek to destroy us thrive on chaos. We're not talking about lone wolves. These are fighters that are now embedded into Europe. What they lack in standing armies, they make up for in ruthless and indiscriminate violence against innocent life. Moms and dads, sons and daughters. They want to see a world that is fractured, frightened, and divided. But one thing is for certain. When confronted with cowardly, irrational terrorists, those who cherish freedom stand together. Here in America, these attacks are a reminder to us to be constantly vigilant. Our most important role, our number one priority, is the safety and security of this country. But we're also reminded just how desperate the rest of the world is for true leadership and a true commitment to destroying the groups that seek to harm the innocent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, along with my colleagues, my heart goes out today to those affected by this senseless act of terror in Brussels. We should all keep those individuals, their families, that community, the country in our thoughts and prayers. But I'm afraid these random acts of terrorism will not end anytime soon. I believe the time has come for President Obama to create a complete and thorough strategy to defeat ISIS, a plan that will give our military leaders and soldiers the tools that they need to destroy ISIS once and for all. We must confront radical Islamic terrorism head-on, reversing the tide of terrorism swelling around the world. We must demonstrate that the United States, the greatest country in the world, will not stand for these senseless acts of terrorism any longer.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. Questions?
Donald Trump said this morning on Today's Show that there should be more enhanced interrogation techniques, specifically waterboarding. Also said the U.S. should close up our borders till we figure out what's going on. Do you think that's a smart strategy?
Yeah, I'm not going to take the bait this morning. Wong.
Mr. Speaker, have you been briefed by national security officials on the Brussels attack, and is there any sort of credible threat to the Capitol or to Washington itself?
No, I have received updates. It's still unfolding. We do not have all of the information at hand right now, but we have reached out to the intelligence community, and I have received some updates this morning, and I have absolutely no reason to believe that there's a threat here.
Yesterday, Elizabeth Warren said that Donald Trump is authoritarian. Prior to that, Mexican president said he's a fascist. You've talked with him, you've dealt with him. What do you think of those?
I don't see it that way.
There are increasing concerns among some Republicans that the way that this race is going could actually flip control.
It's going to be all presidential this time, isn't it? Yeah.
The House. There's concern about flipping control.
Oh, okay.
Of the House.
That's.
Are you at all concerned?
No, I'm really not. I'm not concerned about the House flipping because we are in control of our own actions. And that means we're putting together an agenda to take to the country to show what we need to do to get this country back on the right track. We are doing exactly what people sent us here to do, which is roll up our sleeves, get to work, take the principles that we believe in, that we campaigned on, that created the beautiful country in the first place, apply them to the problems of the day, and offer the people of this country real solutions that fix problems in their lives so that the people of this country have a real choice in 2016. That is what we control. That is what the House can produce. That's what the House is going to produce. And because of that, we are confident about our future here in the House.
Given the attacks today, do you think the United States' relationship with NATO countries needs to change, either more engaged or less engaged?
Well, look, we are NATO. So I don't know if we are a part of NATO. I think I didn't see the speech that Mr. Trump gave yesterday, so I assume that's walking me in that direction, but I didn't actually see what he said, so I'm just not going to go farther down that.
Mr. Speaker, the budget has yet to move to the floor, but you're moving forward on appropriations bills for supplemental markup tomorrow. Do you plan on moving bills through committee into the floor even if we don't get a budget?
So the appropriators are sticking with their already predetermined schedule in their committee level. We had another family discussion today about how to proceed with respect to the budget. We gave the appropriators deadlines for floor consideration, accommodating our budget goals, which is mid-April, which is the law. We're still proceeding on that plan, hopefully getting a budget, but we're having that family conversation. But what we did not want to do is slow the appropriators down for the spade work that they have to do at the committee level. But right now, we're still having that family conversation with our members about how to proceed with the budget. No, we need to do a budget. Did it? Wong, you want to do another round?
I was just wondering if given where Trump is currently in the presidential standings, is it time for John Kasich to drop out, given that he has no
You really think I'm going to answer these questions? I mean, good grief.
Given that he has no shot at winning electorally.
My job is, as a conservative, to speak out what I believe in at the time, to defend our principles, but as the Speaker and therefore the Chairman of the Convention, to be dispassionate, to call balls and strikes. And I'm not going to weigh in on these things. Look, every now and then when I see something where conservatism is being disfigured, whether it's from anybody, by the way, not just one person, anybody, I'm going to speak out in defense of conservatism. But as the chair of the convention, I'm going to be dispassionate. Rules are rules. I'm going to stick with the rules, and I'm not going to comment on all these up and down, go this way, that way, who's up, who's down. I'm not going to comment on that stuff. Do you have a non-presidential question? You don't, do you? Good grief. All right, back there. Yeah. That's why we're still. I don't know the answer to that question yet. We're still trying to have a family conversation with our members about how to proceed on the budget. Look, we want to do a budget. That's very clear. The question is, do we have the votes to pass a budget? And that's the conversation we're having with our members. But the appropriators aren't going to wait around and then be caught flat-footed without their work done. So the appropriators are getting their work done, getting ready to bring bills to the floor. Are we able to pass a budget?
When do you have to make a decision on whether when is your?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. April 15th is the statutory deadline for a budget resolution. We lost July because of the conventions for all practical purposes, so we have a shorter appropriations window. That is why we started this process earlier. The kinds of family conversations we're having right now are the kinds of family conversations we usually have in the beginning of April. So we're having them now in March instead of April, given the fact that our calendar is constrained.
So do you think you're talking about like mid-April to make?
I don't know the answer to that. That's something our team's going to decide. Andy.
What are you going to do with the president's request to combat Zika?
Well, I would refer you to our appropriators, who tell us that there is plenty of money in the pipeline right now, money that is not going to Ebola, that was already in the pipeline, that can go immediately to Zika. So that money can be reprogrammed. So I would just refer you to the Appropriations Committee for more details on that.
Speaker Ryan, what do you think of the president's trip to Cuba?
Not much. I think it's fairly ironic. We had the AIPAC conference yesterday, where we were talking about standing up with our allies, fighting for freedom, standing up for national security, and the president takes a trip to Cuba, where he effectively gets nothing in return, and he legitimizes a tyrannical dictatorship. The irony was not lost on me. Deirdre.
Given what's happening in the attacks in Brussels, do you think the president should cut his trip short to Cuba? Is it appropriate for him to be there?
I won't comment on that. I haven't given any thought to that question.
On your agenda project, can you give us an update on where things stand and whether that needs to come out sooner rather than later?
Everybody says that. No, we're on track. We wanted to have a vibrant listening period where we are listening to our members, listening to constituents, listening to interested people from around the country. Our members are going to go home and do town hall meetings talking with their constituents. So we're in the information and listening stage of our agenda project. Coming back from recess, we're going to go into the drafting stage of our agenda project, where we're going to start putting pen to paper so that late spring we are in the rollout stage. So we are exactly where we had planned on being, and we want to make sure that we get it right, and we want to make sure that we listen to our constituents. So a 2-week recess period where we're going to do a district work period is the opportunity that many of our members will have to use to go listen to their constituents and talk to them about this agenda project. So we're basically on track with where we are, and we're not changing our timeline.
Will there need to be approval from the conference as a whole before you release it?
Our working groups are going to be putting it together.
Is the House on track with regard to the Puerto Rico legislation?
Yeah, we are. We're going to, obviously, we're going to be doing it after we come back from the district work period. But the Resources Committee is doing a very good job working on this issue. They're on track. They're off about a week because we have the Easter recess. But what's that?
We're doing a bipartisan
meeting
today too.
And we're doing a bipartisan meeting today. And we are working on a bipartisan basis on this. And we expect when they come back from the district work period to be acting on it at the Resource Committee.
Are you going to be taking any other members with you to Israel?
Yeah, I'm taking a large group of members. Yeah.
All right.
Did you say hi to Trump at the Verizon Center yesterday?
I didn't see him.
You're trying hard today.
Bakersfield. What was the Bakersfield? Hey, that was good.
That was a good game.
They covered the spread.
House Speaker Paul Ryan speaks Wednesday on the state of American politics. You can see his remarks starting at 8 p.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN. Coming up on C-SPAN, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses the AIPAC conference in Washington. After that, today's hearing on the 2017 Defense Department budget.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, live every day with news and policy issues that impact you. Coming up Wednesday morning, Republican Congressman Leonard Lance of New Jersey talks about the 21st Century Cures Act and progress being made to get the legislation passed by the Senate. Mr. Lance will also discuss Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, which takes place this month, and being named Congressional Champion of Health Innovation by the Healthcare Leadership Council. Then Democratic Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton of the District of Columbia on infrastructure and issues involving the D.C. Metro, including a recent shutdown of the system. She'll also discuss the Flint, Michigan water crisis and oversight. Be sure to watch C-SPAN's Washington Journal beginning live at 7 a.m. Eastern Wednesday morning. Join the discussion.
Today, Arizona voters are voting in that state's presidential primary. Utah holds caucuses for both parties, and Idaho has caucuses for Democrats. Later tonight, we'll bring you speeches by some of the candidates. Hillary Clinton is campaigning in Seattle, while Senator Bernie Sanders is in San Diego, California. We'll have election results and speeches tonight here on C-SPAN. In February, President Obama announced his plan to close the Guantanamo Bay detention facility in Cuba. Wednesday, Pentagon and State Department officials testify before the House Foreign Affairs Committee on the president's plan. See their testimony live at 9:30 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 2.
The need for horses on the farm began to decline radically in the 1930s. It was not until the 1930s that they figured out how to make a rubber tire big enough to fit on a tractor. And starting in the 1930s and 1940s, you had an almost complete replacement of horses as the work animals on farms. I do believe, in one of my books on horses, I read that in the decade after World War II, we had something like a horse holocaust, that the horses were no longer needed, and we didn't get rid of them in a very pretty way.
Sunday night on Q&A, Robert Gordon, professor of economics at Northwestern University, discusses his book, The Rise and Fall of American Growth, which looks at the growth of the American standard of living between 1870 and 1970 and questions its future.
One thing that often interests people is the impact of Superstorm Sandy on the East Coast back in 2012. That wiped out the 20th century for many people. The elevators no longer worked in New York. The electricity stopped. You couldn't charge your cell phones. You couldn't pump gas into your car because it required electricity to pump the gas. So the power of electricity in the internal combustion engine to make modern life possible is something that people take for granted.
Sunday night at 8 Eastern on C-SPAN's Q&A.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke via satellite to the American Israel Public Affairs Committee's annual policy conference. He addressed the terrorist attacks in Brussels, the U.S. Israel alliance, and urged the rejection of the UN resolution on Palestinian statehood. This is 20 minutes.
Good morning, America. Good morning, AIPAC. And a special good morning to the 4,000 students who are cutting class today to be with AIPAC in Washington. Greetings to all of you from Jerusalem. I want to first send my condolences to the families of those murdered in today's terrorist attacks in Brussels. The chain of attacks from Paris to San Bernardino, to Istanbul, to the Ivory Coast, and now to Brussels, and the daily attacks in Israel. This is one continuous assault on all of us. In all these cases, the terrorists have no resolvable grievances. It's not as if we could offer them Brussels or Istanbul, or California, or even the West Bank. That won't satisfy their grievances, because what they seek is our utter destruction and their total domination. Their basic demand is that we should simply disappear. Well, my friends, that's not going to happen. The only way to defeat these terrorists is to join together and fight them together. That's how we'll defeat terrorism. With political unity and with moral clarity. I think we have that in abundance. And I want to thank today the leadership of AIPAC and each and every one of you. I thank you for the tremendous support you've provided Israel over so many years. I thank you for the clear and unequivocal stand you took last year during the nuclear Iran deal debate, a debate critical for Israel's security. And that debate, though intense, did not undermine the unbreakable alliance between Israel and the United States. As part of that great alliance, America has generously provided Israel with many of the tools we need to defend ourselves. We're now working on a new agreement to help bolster Israel's security in the years to come. I hope we can conclude that agreement soon. And I take this opportunity once again to thank President Obama for his support, including for ballistic missile defense. Israel deeply appreciates it, and we also deeply appreciate the strong bipartisan support for Israel in Congress and the strong, overwhelming support for Israel among the American people. Year after year, the overwhelming majority of Americans stand with Israel. They know